Up next, we have our second plenary session for Day 2 on Asian business leveraging new technologies to drive transformation and growth. This session will be facilitated by Mr. Peter McMullin AM, founder of the Good Business Foundation, and as of yesterday, President-elect of CACCI. Please give Peter a warm welcome.
A very warm welcome to everyone, and I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Look, we have a distinguished panel this morning just to run through a really important regional issue, and that it's entitled Leveraging New Technologies to Drive Transformation and Growth. And one of the key features of transformation and growth, I think, is that it be sustainable and it be inclusive. And I think you'll hear from our speakers about how that works in regard to their own experience and what contributions they will make. But as more activities shift online post-COVID, the emerging digital world has tremendous potential for further growth. And the session we're going to be examining today, opportunities presented by new technologies, blockchain, AI and machine learning, digital platforms, 3D printing, mobile payments, smart cities, smart healthcare, etc., to make businesses, finance and be more responsive to the changing needs of customers. Now, our distinguished panel and invited speakers are going to highlight the strengths of the Asia-Pacific communities in driving innovation for sustainable, as I said earlier, inclusive economic growth, and point out how chambers of commerce can be a leading player in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship. And we saw that yesterday at the session on digitalisation, and as well with the young entrepreneurs. Some magnificent contributions around this area, and I look forward to more this morning. But our first speaker is none other than Andrew Cumpston, who is the State Director of the Victorian State Office at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And I have known him for some years in my role as an honorary consul both for East Timor and Georgia over recent years, and he's a firm advocate of not only Victoria's but Australia's role in the region. So it's my delight to welcome Andrew Cumpston up to address us. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Peter. And may I also echo your acknowledgement of country and recognise any Indigenous people who might be here present with us today. I am going to talk in a moment on digital trade to the topic specifically, but just walking around the room, I thought, and just talking to people about what the other sessions had been, since just to explain who I am, I represent the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So I am an Australian diplomat, but I work here in Australia. I've got the best job in the world because I work as an Australian diplomat, which I love, but I'm also in my hometown, Melbourne, and I get to work with amazing stakeholders like Vecchi, who are an absolute delight to deal with every day. Now, just to explain, we handle trade policy. We have a sister organisation called Austrade, which do trade promotion, and they can talk more specifically about individual industries. And I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues from Global Victoria, who some of you may have worked with, who are tireless advocates of both Victoria and Australia's trade interests. But speaking broadly, I'm wearing my hat as working for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Our Trade Minister, Don Farrell, made a speech in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and it was a landmark speech. It was the first speech of the still new government, and he laid out 4 key points for Australia's trade policy. The first is the importance of diversification. For those in the room would know that Australia has become extremely dependent on exports to China and in a few key sectors. And that is something that we've learned the hard way is not sustainable, that every economy needs to have diversified interests, and to it we've aggressively pursued trade agreements with some of our old partners and new friends. And In the last few weeks, we've finalised a trade agreement with India, we've finalised a free trade agreement with the UK, we've finalised a green economy agreement with Singapore, and we're looking forward to finalising a free trade with the FTA with the EU. And we continue to push that agenda in a progressive manner. Secondly, and I noticed this came up in the last session, we remain strong advocates of the multilateral trading system. Of course, we want to reform it and strengthen it, and we recognise it is an imperfect mechanism. But as a speaker said in the last session, it's important to celebrate the successes. Like the 12th Ministerial Conference, there was a very important agreement on fisheries subsidies, which is an existential issue for the Pacific Island nations. This is a major source of revenue, major source of protein for Pacific Island nations, and Australia and Fiji managed to pursue and successfully enact an agreement on reducing fishing subsidies, which are very damaging to the interests of Pacific Island states. So it is still possible to have victories. Thirdly, we need to diversify what we trade. And I know our next speakers will talk about some of the new trading opportunities in the green economy, and it's something the new government takes extremely seriously. We took an ambitious legislated targets to COP, which, for those who don't know, it's a 43% reduction in emissions by 2030, and we plan to pursue those. The government plans to pursue those and help our neighbours also pursue their COP targets. But part of that agenda, renewables agenda, will not be achieved without new minerals. It creates new industries, but it also creates the requirement for new minerals. Rare earths, where minerals, they're crucial part of the government's new strategy, and we're looking for partners to help develop Australia's significant resources in that area. Finally, we believe the benefits of trade should be shared more fairly in the community, and the government has announced a Trade 2040 task force, which will bring together government, industry, union and community representatives to consult on how do we seek to shape trade in our world. And I will come to that in a second when I talk about digital trade and IPEF, because that is something our partners are interested in as well. So, turning to digital trade, which is more directly relevant to the subject today, I would start by saying that digital trade rules underpin supply chains around the world and across all forms of trade in goods and services, whether delivered traditionally or online. Robust international digital trade rules provide certainty, stability and build trust in the online environment. The rules also promote compatible systems for businesses operating across borders to facilitate trade and to avoid protectionism. And I know this will be dear to people in this room. It is also arguably the smaller businesses and SMEs who stand to benefit most from these rules. Are they much less likely to have the capacity and resources to navigate complicated and varying rules and systems in each different countries? Which is, as you know from working practically, if you're one of the largest couple of businesses in a country, it's very easy to get the attention of rule makers and have the rules shaped to you. But if you're a smaller business, you have to play by the rules and you need consistent, stable rules, which is a key part of Australia's trade agenda. And just to knock off just to mention briefly a few agreements that we've been pursuing, the Australia-Singapore Digital Economy Agreement broke new ground. It set global benchmarks for trade rules to reduce barriers to digital trade and build an environment in which Australian businesses and consumers are able to participate from digital trade and the digitalisation of the economy. And just quickly, it's a very long list of what's in the agreement, but just a few examples is that it prevents unnecessary restrictions on the transfer and location of data. It improved protections for source code, and it included new commitments on e-invoicing and e-payment frameworks. And none of the provisions in the agreement affect the ability to enforce for Australia or Singapore to enforce existing regulations on privacy, which, for those who don't know, is a very hot-button issue in Australia right now. Similarly, the Australia-UK FTA included very strong and what we consider world-leading provisions on digital trade. The commitments we have secured highlight our focus on setting strong digital trading rules that encourage the cross-border flow of data and the breaking down of barriers to trade, including forced data localisation, a topic that will come up again. The UK FTA also contains provisions to protect innovations by preventing the forced transfer of technology, such as source code and encryption keys. Subject to, of course, we still need to have we're still subject to legitimate security oversight by appropriate authorities. By the way, could I have a glass of water, please? And finally, well, not completely finally, but there's something that has a lot of focus at the moment was the IPEF, which is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is something that people are probably aware that the current US administration advocating and supporting. And Australia sees US economic leadership in the region as essential to any new regional digital trade rules that can deliver meaningful outcome for businesses and provide a credible counterweight to growing digital protectionism in the Indo-Pacific. It's self-evident as the home of the world's largest tech companies that nothing in the digital space will truly be meaningful without the United States' participation. We are pleased that the US has indicated the IPEF will include a high ambition and binding set of rules with a heavy focus on digital trade. As we work with the US and others to finalise the IPEF, there are clear opportunities to establish a new high-standard digital trade agreement, whether as part of IPEF or complementary to it. We have three main aims for this, and that is narrowing the digital divide through inclusive digital settings, both between countries and within them, promoting an open and inclusive online environment that promotes productivities for small to medium enterprises and creates new jobs while protecting the rights of workers and consumers, and combating digital authoritarianism in the region by ensuring digital policies reflect democratic values, protect personal privacies, and allow for freedom of expression. A new regional digital trade agreement would build on the gains we have made in some of the previous regional and bilateral agreements that I have already mentioned. But we think the new set of agreements could further these objectives by considering the potential relationships between labour standards and digital trade, pushing back against authoritarian models of data management and data governance, and enabling the achievement of environmental sustainability outcomes. We recognise that this is an area that governments will need to be very active and forward-looking, and we are keen to explore the art of the possible. And that's a really important phrase. The art of the possible is what governments deal in. Ultimately, we want to shape a framework that delivers tangible economic benefits and strengthens trade and economic integration in the Indo-Pacific. And with that, I might leave it there because...
Well, thanks, Andrew, for that really enlightening introduction to the topic. I want to move on to our next speaker, and that is Mark Harwood, who is the Chief Executive Officer of YGAP. Now, YGAP is very active in the region, and I know in my personal capacity that my foundation has supported a lot of the work of YGAP, and very proud to support it. And I think it's an exemplar of what can be done in our region. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Harwood to take the floor. Thank you very much, Mark.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So, building upon the foundation that Andrew set, YGAP is a not-for-profit organisation working around the world, and we're really focused on achieving sustainable and inclusive economies, but doing that led through local entrepreneurship. We want to make sure we support entrepreneurs who are creating positive change in their economies. We do that at two levels. We do it directly with entrepreneurs by providing accelerated programs that provide direct support, but also how do we make sure the enabling environments are more inclusive and sustainable to be able to support those local entrepreneurs to make sure their businesses or their SMEs can thrive. We also believe that entrepreneurship is a powerful lever to really achieving the SDGs, to bring about the change that we need to see in the world, and to really break down some of the existing socio-economic structures that have been established that are reinforcing some of the existing inequalities that exist. So who do we work with? We work with entrepreneurs who are underestimated by too many people. They're under-resourced, and that's because of their gender, ethnicity, they may be based rurally, or their background. We also make sure they're driving climate and social solutions through their business. And having been around for almost 15 years, YGAP has supported 626 impact businesses across the world through 60 programs since 2008. Just in the last year, we ran these programs. So here in Australia, we run a program helping refugee and migrant entrepreneurs, given the fact that skills aren't recognised, the fact it's harder to secure employment, that's been proven, and also because if you're a refugee or migrant, you're twice as likely to start a business in Australia as opposed to those who were born here. We've worked across Southeast Asia through local partners, Sri Lanka. We worked with the German government development agency, GIZ, to help them embed an inclusive and strengthen their gender strategies across their implementing arms. And we have local teams on the ground in South Africa, Kenya, and also Fiji in the Pacific Islands, where I'll focus most of today's presentation on. So I won't go into the detail, but we do have a robust theory of change. We measure the impact of our programs for 2 years after the program has finished, but ultimately our impact is how do we ensure that underestimated entrepreneurs are leading positive social, economic and environmental change through their small businesses. And the key barriers which we break down for them is access to appropriate support, so business development services, access to capital and access to markets to help them scale. As I said, YGAP works across the entire ecosystem. We started off just working with entrepreneurs directly by running accelerator programs, which go for about a year. But then we realised at the end of that program, the entrepreneurs would almost fall into this cliff. And if you were a local entrepreneur, you're a woman, you're running a particular type of venture seen as an impact venture, you weren't receiving the same type of access in the ecosystem. So we've actually now started working with partners at the ecosystem level to really strengthen those ecosystems and enable these local entrepreneurs to thrive. Cross-cutting themes. So I joined in March 2020. I had 4 days in the office. I then had to write a global pandemic policy and tell everyone, go home. And so through that time, we've actually established a new strategy, which has been great. And the cross-cutting themes based on what we're seeing taking part in the region and what's going on in terms of rising inequality is to embed digital, gender equality and climate as our 3 cross-cutting themes. Digital access. So technology can drive financial and market access for entrepreneurs, allowing them to grow their businesses in a resilient way. However, this potential can only be realised if the digital space is accessible to everyone. Unfortunately, these barriers are also higher for women, and so that's where we really focus our attention. Gender equality. So these stats are really recent. In 2021, 2% of venture capital globally went to women. 87% of accelerators are run by men. In 2021, less than 1% of total funds going into Africa went to female founders. And this is despite Africa having the highest concentration of female entrepreneurs in the world. Now, Root Impact, who have been around for 10 years, have dispersed $1 billion of capital, just released a report showing some of the findings from their capital disbursements. They found that across Latin America, Indonesia and Sub-Saharan Africa, businesses that promoted equal gender participation were more profitable and stable, less likely to experience significant revenue dips, less likely to default, and more likely to secure new sources of financing. So YGAP applies a gender equity lens across all of our programs and all our operations. We do that at the ecosystem level, but also run programs that are addressing the specific barriers that women face across the Pacific Islands and Africa. Climate. As I've heard today from some of the speakers and speaking with some of you, we're really looking at de-risking businesses, as is required to do in terms of adaptation. How do you adapt to a changing climate if you're going to be viable and sustainable and grow your business? But also, how do we focus on entrepreneurs who are mitigating climate change and actually have a business solution that is addressing what we're all facing? We do that through resilience building, decarbonising and acceleration. I'll now talk to a particular program we're doing in Fiji that is really looking to embed a sustainable and inclusive ecosystem for women, and that's through mobile payments. So Fijian SMEs face specific challenges around online payments, including international payment gateways. For example, there's a misperception that SMEs pose a prepayment risk to banks. This results in high transaction fees and the lodgement of a security deposit that is often beyond the capacity of smaller SMEs. This places SMEs at a distinct disadvantage to the large retailers who can service these fees, but also have stronger relationships with the local banks. There's also an inherent belief, unfortunately, that e-commerce in Fiji poses a fraud liability for the acquiring banks. One means of addressing these misperceptions and mitigating these risks is upgrading the security systems of Fijian banks. So Westpac is currently offering an e-commerce payment gateway delivered by E-Trade Alliance leverage partner MasterCard. MasterCard is working with Westpac to upgrade the authentication protocol that reduces the risk for Fijian SMEs to integrate in the payment gateway and provide e-commerce customers a safer and more seamless purchasing system. Together with MasterCard, a local tech startup called FinTech Pacific, Westpac, and working with the Australian Government through their Business Partnerships Platform, or BPP, YGAP is making sure that women are able to transact, save using mobile payments, and not be left behind in terms of the digital revolution that's happening across the Pacific Islands. These are informal women vendors who you see at the markets. Unfortunately, cruise ships that are a big part of the economy, people come off the cruise ships, they go into the markets, they don't have the local currency, and unfortunately the local women weren't able to engage with these international customers, and the customers would go into the larger retailers where credit cards were available. So we've worked with these organisations as part of this consortium to actually create a mobile payments gateway. And this is the first for Asia Pacific in terms of technology being used, including China, and we're really proud of what it's been able to do. The program is focusing on, as a starting point, engaging 400 women. This is micro women working in markets to engage and use the platform. It launched in October, the technology, and it's now being tested in markets. So if any of you have a trip planned to Fiji, my parents-in-law are going there early next year. I can't wait to see them using this platform with the women in the markets. It's called DuaPay, which Dua in the Fijian language means one pay. And it's really exciting to see what it's doing. It's breaking down socio-economic and cultural barriers for women business owners. And whilst I said we've kicked off the pilot, we're confident that when businesses see the advantages and the barriers that this is reducing for women vendors, we think it's going to scale. And our plan with MasterCard is to really scale this across the Pacific Islands beyond Fiji alone. The second one is just building upon e-commerce. Yes, we have a mobile payments gateway, which is great. We want to create a holistic platform and actually get women business owners in Fiji to know how to market and actually engage with international markets, because scale is a huge issue in the Pacific Islands. And if you can't move beyond Fiji or your local national borders, it's going to prevent you from scaling and achieving that real significant transformational change. So what we're doing now, YGAP is working with the US government, and we're actually training 30 of these entrepreneurs to understand how to market themselves globally through e-commerce platforms and move beyond Facebook or other informal online e-commerce marketplaces. This is Anna from Carvalicious, just to sort of paint the picture. She went through our accelerator program, which helps Fijian women entrepreneurs who are running an impact business. It's called Carvalicious. So only 5% of women are engaged in kava selling and processing. She wants to disrupt that. She now is selling across multiple stores in Suva, in Fiji. She recently took part in the Fiji Investment and Trade Mission in Australia. I love what she's wearing, battling the winter conditions of Sydney. And she was very proud to bring her products over here, and she's about to start exporting overseas. She's also using that e-commerce platform that I mentioned. And just a quick one, Sagupta, she went through the 2019 YGAP Accelerator program. She was raised by a single mother. She noticed that people were just discarding plastics across Fiji. It's a huge issue, as you mentioned, Andrew, for the fishery department and other livelihoods. She's now started employing other single mothers in her business, the Fusion Hub, to actually upscale plastic into high-end furniture. And she's now employing women. She's gone through our program and she's now scaled, and already she's reduced 400 tonnes of plastic that she's removed from across Fiji. So that's the type of entrepreneurs that we've helped. We've already helped 626, and we're looking forward to helping many, many more. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and what a great presentation that was. I want to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Alireza Yavari, who's an accomplished professional and well-travelled international lawyer and arbitrator from Iran. Having studied and practiced law extensively throughout the world, he specialises in the drafting and review of major international commercial contracts and practices in the fields of international investment law, international trade law and dispute resolution. and our paths have crossed in Untrail, and as a mediator I am, he's an arbitrator, and we see each other in different environments. So it's great to have him here to talk to us today on the topic before us. So welcome, Dr. Alireza Jabari. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I am very pleased and happy. It's a great honor and privilege to be here and to have an address here today, and thank you for organizing this session. And I would like also to thank fellow speakers. Actually, and I also appreciate the kind introduction by His Excellency the President-elect of CACCI, and as I've been told, secretly somehow, I've been elected as the Vice President, and I'm looking forward to be working with His Excellency the President for the South Asian region of CACCI, and we would be very much happy to get the tasks done and follow the path forward. Actually, since the theme for this session is leveraging new technologies for transformation and growth, I've chosen a different topic since I'm an environmentalist as well, and we are having lots of problems currently in our country, in our region, which are all related to the climate change and also its effects all over the world. We recently had the COP27, and since it is a trending issue, I would like to draw your attention to some points and have a very quick lecture on that. So, first of all, again, it is an honor and privilege to address you at the 36th CACCI conference. As all of you know, our world has begun a transition which may be comparable to the Industrial Revolution centuries ago. We have realized that the conventional sources of energy we have been exploiting over the last 200 years is polluting our environment, warming the climate, and it is almost impossible to continue unless we make major changes in the sources of energy we use. Needless to say, we need new machinery, new technology for the new model of energy, which will be dominating our world in the near future. So it seems inevitable that major changes to our way of life will take place. In fact, it has already begun. But the critical question is how we are managing this transformation. Will we end up in a better, more equal, more prosperous world, or we may end up with a planet more divided, more unjust, with more poverty, hunger, and inequalities towards most of the population? In our view, some individuals or groups with a special interest are trying to advance this revolution at an extremely faster rate. It doesn't mean that we are undermining the effect of climate change, or mean that, or the crisis and danger that using fossil fuels has posed to our planet. In fact, we are experiencing it very harshly in our country, Iran. 30 years ago, Iran was leading the world in developing water reservoirs and hydroelectric power plants. Now, not only we do not have enough electricity, but also we have lost most of the most beautiful lakes, rivers, and natural landscapes to the triumph of constructing dams one after another for political gains. We are experiencing dangerous rates of land subsidence. And also, as we have changed the hydraulics of our rivers and drainage basins, we must learn from the past, and these are a few examples to illustrate that it is possible to escalate and worsen the situation if we do not employ a correct strategy in our time. The billionaire owners of the so-called green energy enterprises are advancing this revolution as fast as they can. The reason is simple and clear. Like all the advertising materials advocating for green energy, clean transportation, net zero emission manufacturing, and so on, require warning and terrifying the public about the use of fossil fuels and its devastating effect on our planet and our next generations. Yes, this is true. We are in a dire condition and we must take swift action. But the haste should not make us ignore the wisdom and providence to go after non-sustainable solutions. In preventing our planet from warming, we are filling beautiful plains and landscapes with giant, horrifying wind turbines. which destroy the scenery beyond miles. They are enormously large and frightening, negatively affect the wildlife, especially birds, are expensive and dangerous to build and operate, and usually not feasible to dismantle, even causing a psychologically proven phobia for many. Although lots of past and ongoing researches have been done on their effect on our environment, still we do not know the long-term effects of these wind turbines if we are going to build high enough number of wind turbines to reliably provide us with electricity. We are rendering parts of our shores useless in order to harness energy from the waves or planting wind turbines offshore to get more energy. This is just a brief example to show that while the wind turbines may not be warming our planet or have zero carbon emission, they are otherwise destroying our natural landscapes and threatening our wildlife. Look at nuclear power plants. They are dubbed as a means of developing enormous amounts of almost clean energy. But what happens when we have an accident? Engineers know that irrespective of how safe a design may be, the accidents are inevitable. What happens when a nuclear catastrophe takes place? Hundreds of square miles of land may become uninhabitable for decades, if not centuries. Needless to elaborate on the devastating environmental effects of the nuclear waste. It is possible to prove scientifically and thermodynamically that the sun is almost the only active source of energy which can be exploited for the future of humanity and our planet. Almost all other sources of energy, whether the foods we eat, the oil and gas or coal that we extract, the wind energy, wave energy, and even hydraulic energy from hydroelectric power plants, come into existence by the effect of sun. With no solar energy, no plants would grow, no fossil fuel would have existed, and no rain, wind would be present to harness its energy. So from a scientific perspective, we believe most of the funding for green energy researchers should focus on economically and reliably utilizing, storing, and transmitting electrical energy that harness from solar power plants. We should focus on building cheaper, more durable and more efficient solar cells, and also invest in building more solar thermal power plants, which basically use the same principles of conventional thermal power plants. Building integrated photovoltaic BIPV cells may be used in our buildings to harness more solar energy while creating more beautiful buildings. We should take this opportunity and leverage this process to create not only a better planet and environment, but to create a more equal world, a world with less poverty, less hunger, less places without the basic needs of life, and a world where more people have the opportunity to thrive and prosper. If we employ a clever strategy in this inevitable transformation, we can create more opportunities and more prosperity to more human beings. Solar energy is available in many places on our planet. Actually, it is available more in the less developed regions of the world. In transforming our planet through the use of new technologies and new sources of energy and machinery, we cannot create more poverty, more hunger, more income inequality, and more division between the poor and the wealthy. It is an obligation for humanity to employ this historic period of time for creating a better world. A better world does not just mean less global warming, less carbon emission, or releasing lower amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but also it means a safer, more prosperous, and more developed infrastructure for all the people living on Earth. If we do not take this opportunity and let ourselves be manipulated by some politicians and groups with a special interest or owners of enterprises that are pioneering new technologies, we may end up in a world which is more unequal, more restricted, and more divided. The only outcome, which is exactly what these groups are looking for, will be the birth of trillionaires instead of billionaires. It will be another big tech monopoly again. The United Nations should establish an international agency to ensure that the technologies and infrastructure needed to harness and use the renewable energy, especially solar power, reaches to even the least developed countries in the world. Not only this process will guarantee the availability of energy for all the people, but through job opportunities, it will have a positive economic impact on the people in those regions. If we can develop feasible and cheap methods for storing and transmitting solar power, even wealthier nations may opt to build and operate solar or solar thermal power plants in less developed countries, therefore creating more jobs and more opportunity in those regions while also ensuring that more people have access to energy and infrastructure. With rushing toward going green, we may create more poverty and more problems for the most vulnerable people on Earth, those who may not be able to even survive without fossil fuels at the current stage, and end up with a more unjust world. This fast process will only benefit the owners of the companies pioneering new energies and new technologies while victimizing billions of people. But if we take the time to think in developing sustainable strategies and estimating the long-term effect of this transformation on our planet, our economy, our society, and our wildlife, we can leverage this inevitable change to transform our world to a better place for everyone. We may not be able to solve every single problem, but this opportunity is great enough to take a major step toward having a better world by providing clean energy to more people on our planet. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Alireza Yavari. That was a very content-rich speech. We've got a video presentation from Mr. Aloysius Wee, who's the chairman of the ASEAN Legal Alliance based in Singapore, and he wasn't able to be with us, but we'll put him on the screen after our Q&A. But I'll just ask Mark, if you don't mind, Mark, the program you developed in Fiji for transforming the way the market operated through MasterCard, is that happening elsewhere? Have you got other countries that are interested in this, or are you testing it elsewhere?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So this is our first time working with MasterCard through their Centre for Inclusive Growth, and this was a bit of a pilot for us, and we're very interested in how we can scale this across the Pacific Islands. Fiji is a good one to pilot in terms of its infrastructure and the ecosystem that exists in the Pacific, but we've got our eyes on a lot of other countries in the Pacific, as do they, and we're very, very keen to expand the outcomes, just given what's happening in the Pacific from a digital revolution and the fact that, unfortunately, those that are rurally based, or women or others, are less likely to be able to engage in that revolution.
Thank you.
That's, my name is James Chu. That's I'm from Taiwan, the Chinese National Association of Industry and Commerce. And I have one question for each of three speakers, respectively. So that's my question to Andrew, is that you introduce the so-called digital regulation in the IPEF and also Australia, EU, the UK free FTA. And but we all understand one of the thorny issue is regarding so-called the localization. So the data, the transborder free movement, which like country like United States very much promotes that kind of idea. But however, the many data, for the national data, such as your banking financial data or your medical data, is actually a kind of the personal privacy. So how to address this issue in order to alleviate people's concerns? So how should we do this in order to build up the digital trust? And my question to Mark is that you just mentioned the digital, the e-commerce, but we all understand the digital divide, not only just between the developing and the developed countries, but also between the age, the young people and the old people. And for the old people to attach to access those new technology, we all have so-called a sense or feel. However, the people, the age over 50, normally they have very strong purchasing power. And so that's the main target, right? The main markets. So how to help the old generation to use this new technology rather than just the developing and the develop. So that's my question. And also my question to Dr. Yavari, because you introduced, I totally agree with you. The solar power is very green, but the solar power, when in the evening, they can't generate any electricity. So that means if we want to develop the solar power, we must together with the storage facilities, right? So during the daytime, you generate electricity, you can store, right? Then in the evening, you can release those electricities. Otherwise, this solar power, you only can, well, during in the evening, they can't do anything at all. So that's my comment to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, James. You've asked an excellent question and probably the hardest possible question, so my congratulations. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's currently quite an active debate about digital privacy because one of Australia's largest health insurers has been hacked and customers have been blackmailed for their privacy data. It's a front page story here in Australia. So it's a difficult issue and governments have to balance it. I would go back to the Singapore Trade Agreement, which both prevents unnecessary restrictions on the transfer and location of data, because just because a server's in your home country doesn't guarantee it's safe. You know, there's an overly simplistic way of looking at these issues that the physical location of something guarantees its safety. Well, if you're in a jurisdiction which you trust, surely there should be some levels of common sense here that it's more about the legislation. The key objective we're trying to achieve here, and something I mentioned in my speech, is that we have to be able to enforce our regulations on privacy and how businesses deal with the data of whether it be Australian people in my government's case or the Taiwanese people. The key point here is that governments can enforce their privacy legislation, not that we use an oversimplistic sort of geographic nationalism. I think everyone in this room knows that geography doesn't guarantee cyber security. Cyber criminals are global and they're international, and the key point here is enforcing privacy, not going to oversimplistic geographic solutions. But there's no perfect answer, and it does require a lot of trust between jurisdictions. And I thank you again, James. Great question.
Thanks, James. When the founders of YGAP came together, they were a group of young volunteers, and it stood for Y Generation Against Poverty, YGAP. And I changed that name. I just did a bit of a KFC, where I just made it YGAP Limited with our members and our board, and because we acknowledge that most of our programs, the diversity of the age of the entrepreneurs is so broad, and many people, single mothers, single fathers, others who want to change careers or want to do something for their community through business, are doing it later in their life. I don't know if you saw some of those pictures with the women that we're working with in Fiji, but they're certainly, the average age is sort of 40, 50, into 60s as well. So it's a great point. And as you said, the purchasing power is there as well. So we can't ignore it as a potential market. But yeah, and a lot of the staff we're all getting on as well. So, and the local staff that we hire, they're not just young people anymore, because we just acknowledge that those that are running businesses and those that are actually purchasing and the customer base extend across many demographics. So good question. Thanks, James.
Alariza.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, James, for the question. Actually, you asked a very specific and right question. That was correct, your comment that how should we store the solar energy? The problem is that when there is no sun, then how are we going to store the energy and then transmit it to some place to use it? Actually, this is the same case for all other types of renewable energies, like, for example, wind energy, waves, and everything is the same. And I think a high and significant amount of our funding should be focusing on the economic ways of storing, like, for example, solar energy, and then economically transmitting it to other parts of the world. This is one of the things that is very important. And for example, we have lots of thermal power plants, like solar thermal power plants in the world. One of the biggest ones is Iwampa in Nevada, and the largest one is being built in Dubai by the government of the UAE, because this is the cleanest way of investing in renewable energies. And also, for example, one of the problems that most of the wind turbines have, you go to Denmark or Copenhagen, you see that there are lots of wind turbines offshore and giant wind turbines that are terrifying for many people. But you do not see wind turbine, for example, in the UAE, because it's a small country. They do not want to destroy the landscape by using wind turbines, so they would go after the solar power as they have more sunlight. And one of the other issues that can be focused on is that, for example, countries close to the for example, countries like most of the African countries, which have more sunlight, and also countries close to the equator, they can, have solar power plants to produce the energy, and then if we have the facilities to store that energy and transmit it to other parts of the world, I think this problem can be solved. And we absolutely need more research and more funding in that regard. Thank you.
I enjoyed the speech of all colleagues here. But the question is how to incorporate these good ideas into CACCI's mission. We can speak about many, many good things in all over the world, but the role and the mission of CACCI is important. So we are gathering here to see how CACCI can be more effective on trade promotion, removing barriers, and helping members of CACCI in this part of the world, as well as cooperation with other international and regional mechanisms and organizations. So I would like to probably suggest to you as President, as well as members of the Council, to take all the good ideas and suggestions that have been made so far and this afternoon in this conference, and bring them to a kind of action and a plan for future activities of CACCI. If not, we can speak about many good things for centuries without any implication on CACCI's attitude and work program in future. So it must come to a program of action or roadmap for CACCI. That's the main point which I would like to say, that the benefiting from all these ideas that was raised today, this morning, and now and in the afternoon. Thank you.
I just respond very briefly. It is not for me to tell you how to act as a chamber, but I can tell you, as someone who works in trade policy, and especially in Australia, we really need the input of the business chambers. And not just when you're talking to us, but when you're talking to ministers, to politicians, say that the rules matter, that we support free trade, because the deals that are done that benefit individual interests, they're done behind closed doors. What chambers benefit from, and multiple members benefit from, is clear, transparent rules. And that's what organisations like the WTO, as frustrating as they can be, they do help us implement. So if your members want free trade, if they want greater liberalisation, if they want clearer rules, just let people know, because that campaigning is very, very beneficial, and it helps reinforce. Governments only have so much intention, and emphasising to governments that it's important is always very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, and I'd endorse what you've just said, and I can guarantee that the focus of CACCI under my leadership will be certainly in that direction. So thank you very much for that contribution. Now, look, we're going to have Aloysius Wee now, who is the chairman of the ASEAN Legal Alliance, on the screen. And
hello, my name is Aloysius Wee. I'm a lawyer with more than 20 years of experience, and I practice in a few areas, particularly technology and setting up businesses across borders for small and medium enterprises. Today, I'd like to share with you my thoughts on leveraging on new technologies to drive transformation and growth. A Greek philosopher once said, "Change is the only constant." And a lot of people are uncomfortable with change, preferring the status quo. That is really understandable because as humans, we resent change. Change brings uncertainty. But when our environment changes, economic situation changes, we need to adapt to these changes to survive. Technology is a tool for us to change. I'm sure all of us who have experienced the last 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic will realize that this is a world event that affects everybody. This is a change that forces us to make decisions about our personal lives and about our businesses. Now, the acceleration of technology adoption was as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. Now you'll see that after the pandemic or during the pandemic, there was more remote working, remote shopping, remote food ordering. All these were put in place because we had to abide by safe distancing requirements and various directives from our governments as to how to manage the COVID-19 situation. With this COVID-19 situation, we saw a rise in e-commerce transactions. People were more dealing, buying and selling a lot more of their transactions online. People are buying and selling food online, rise of online food delivery, people ordering food from restaurants that were not previously doing delivery were started to do food delivery to some form of platform, or they could be doing it themselves. And we saw the rise in technologies for us to work from home, like Zoom, like Google Meets, all these platforms that allow us to remotely work and to connect with other people whilst this pandemic was raging on. Now, the fact that I want to point out to everybody is that we need to adopt and adapt to these new changes, or we'll get left behind. Now, some examples in our history have shown us how technology has moved, and by not adopting, how we could have been left behind. Now, in the past, we used to have letters, snail mail. Now it's email. We used to have the telefax, let's move on to the fax, and then now to the email. So the email seems to be the most predominant form of communication right now. And I think the email will evolve in some way to become the dominant technology for business as well as individual communication. One other example that I like to give is how we consume entertainment. In the past, we only had the television and we were restricted to what the broadcasters would be broadcasting. We had no choice as to what we could watch. We only look at a program and look at the time of the day to decide what was going to be screened and broadcasted, and then we watched it then. Then we had cable TV, which allowed us some choice. The programs were all online or through cable, and we could basically choose to consume that. Finally, we moved on to the current reality, which is online streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV. Basically, we have 24/7 content. Anytime we want to consume it, whether it's going to be on our television set, or our iPads, or on our mobile devices, we could consume it anytime, anywhere. And finally, music, something that's very close to my heart. We used to have records and CDs where we used to put on the players and we play, and we decide what records we want to play, what songs we want to hear. But we have moved on to an online streaming platform called Spotify, where music can be streamed to you any time of the day. And everything is cataloged for you, so searching is easy as well. So the way we consume music has also changed. We need to leverage on technologies. And what does leveraging mean? Leveraging means to use and embrace something so that it would benefit. It will give you an extra additional benefit, or as I would put it, empowerment. Now, small businesses, by embracing technology, would empower them. How do I mean? Now, In a small business, if you have, let's say, for example, a website, this website will give you a global marketplace and platform. You can compete with any big company, any big multinational right now, because you too have a global platform. The online marketplace allows you to reach out to international buyers, international customers, and overnight, a small business with a website can become an international player. This is a way in which technology levels the playing field for a small player. Now, what technology can be deployed for this? You don't really need very high-end sophisticated technology. A lot of the technologies for this example that I've given is based on established technology that's been around for the last 10 to 20 years. The website relies very much on the internet, a phone, mobile phone preferably, a computer, and online banking facilities. All these are things that have been around for some time and can be put together and deployed for you to run a small and medium enterprise operation online to reach out to the world market. Technology is affecting growth. How does technology affect growth? By adopting technology, you can increase efficiencies. Now, what do I mean by that? Going back to the example again of my small medium enterprise where I set up a website. This website is open 24 hours, unlike a brick and mortar store that has an opening time and a closing time. This 24-hour website can advertise, can take orders, can even fill in orders with little human input. If you were to use a brick and mortar store, you probably need 4 to 5 people to run the store to fulfill all these requirements. So in that sense, the technology has enabled this business owner to be more efficient. You could run it with 1 or 2 persons. How does technology affect productivity? Now, productivity is something that is usually associated with the manufacturing process. But correct, the use of automation in manufacturing processes has increased productivity. Now, in a very big example, you'd see car manufacturing, how robots, automation has actually helped in manufacturing cars on the assembly line, taking the place of humans. And that has actually increased productivity because machines can work 24/7 while humans can't, and machines are more consistent in how they are deployed. That is an extreme example, but how do I bring it down to the small medium enterprise level? Now, there's a lot of use of automation in the food and beverage industries, particularly during COVID. We see a lot of robot delivery services being deployed, moving food from the kitchen to the table. That as wait staff in the time when there was a wage crunch and a labor crunch during pandemic. This use of robotic automation deployed in the food and beverage industry in Singapore helped to solve a problem. Now, there's also a high usage of iPads for ordering food. So nowadays, when you go into a restaurant, a lot of the ordering processes are digitized, either through a website, through an iPad, or through scanning a QR code on the phone. You are able to make your orders. So you basically increase productivity by not having the use of a waiter to take orders. So these are some examples of how technologies are affecting efficiencies as well as productivity. Finally, I want to talk to you and share with you about what new technologies are available in the market and to give you an insight as to what the future can hold for you. Now, I want to talk about blockchain. A lot of people have heard about blockchain and they associate it negatively with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Yes, the blockchain has been deployed as a technology, as a backbone for these cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. There is but one usage. Of course, the blockchain technology can be deployed in many other forms that can assist, increase productivity, increase growth, transform technology, transform enterprises. And one example of this is to authenticate transactions and ownership. The big blockchain technology will allow more secure transactions between consumers, between buyers and sellers, between clients and banks. The transactions will be more secure. Number two, it will allow for less counterfeiting and intellectual property or trademark infringement, because blockchain can be deployed to authenticate authenticity of ownership of products that are being produced, that are being manufactured for consumers. So one example would be that if you are creating a piece of art, you could blockchain that with a smart contract so that it can be the one and only original piece. Or if you're making a series of prints, let's say 100 prints, you can blockchain and mark each of these 100 prints so that there will only be 100 prints circulating, and you can authenticate each and every one of these 100 prints that are in the market. The next area of technology that I want to talk about is the metaverse. And this is actually a very huge area. In fact, if you have been following the news, Facebook has changed its name from Facebook to Meta. And the idea here is that Meta will now focus on this new area where it thinks is the next growth area. So what is the metaverse? The metaverse is actually an alternate reality or dimension where people can participate in and interact. So think of it as a computer game where you can actually go in the first person and participate. So you could put yourself up as an avatar, as a person in there, and you can dress yourself up with clothes, by jewelry, by watch, by a blouse. And so there's a whole fashion industry built around dressing avatars. That is a new area of business. Apart from that, there's also real estate. So some people have set up metaverse and start to sell real estate, apartments, villas, commercial real estate in the metaverse. And this allows for them to enjoy their property or use their property in the metaverse. Some people have taken a bolder step to compare real estate in the metaverse like real estate in the real world. So they buy to invest so that when this metaverse, particularly grows and there's a demand for the real estate in there, then they can resell it at a higher price. And finally, sometimes there are even events in the metaverse where there's a mix or hybrid situation where real life performing artists are beamed into this metaverse to conduct a concert, and people are only admitted online through a metaverse to participate. So our lines of reality and virtual reality are being merged, and this is where the metaverse is interesting, because that's a new and totally challenging frontier where businesses can take advantage of and to secure a place in the consumer's minds. So why do I say that? I'll give you an example. Back to the example of real estate, some metaverse communities have emerged where real life companies like Coca-Cola will have taken up some virtual shop or virtual advertising banner so that their brands are being featured in the metaverse. Another area of technology that I want to talk to you about is artificial intelligence. And basically, artificial intelligence is actually very widespread right now, although it's being constantly evolving. And it's embedded into existing technologies. So one example would be AI is used in recognizing voice and speech patterns. So with voice activation software like Google and Cirrus is being used so that the computer is being listening and learning to how one speaks, any speech peculiarities, impediment, any particular slangs, any new words that this person used, so that it can better communicate and take instructions from this person. So that's one example of how AI is being deployed. The other way is that AI is being deployed is to predict consumer choices. So when we ever go online to make purchases, or we use Google to check for things, or we go on YouTube to look for things, there is a machine learning process there to see what we're searching for, what we're interested in. And with an algorithm, they're able to come up with products and services that they think we would be consuming, and they will try to push that to us either through YouTube when you're looking for something. Suddenly you see something that, hey, maybe you're checking on a holiday, and then suddenly you receive a lot of holiday apps that are being pushed to you. So that's one way that AI is being used to predict consumer choices. So today, I've just wanted to give you a flavor of how technology is moving and how, as business people, we should be embracing technology. I know it can be frightful, but at the end of the day, we need to embrace it. If not, you'll get left behind. Now, embracing technology usually comes at a cost, and usually this cost is something that a business owner has to weigh against. How much to invest in technology to achieve efficiencies. And this is something that you need to decide for yourself, take cautious little steps. But what is definitely sure is that you need to take these little steps. I started my presentation with a quote from an ancient Greek philosopher. I'll end my presentation with a quote from a modern technopreneur, Bill Gates. And he says, we're changing the world with technology. So do not get left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being at this session, and I hope you've taken something away from it and you can reflect on it online on future occasions. But thank you again, and if you wouldn't mind just expressing your appreciation in the usual way. Thank you.
Thank you.